Well, it's a pretty toasty, warm afternoon. All the fans of there's fans in general. I think there's fans of Rory here. So I mean, it's an absolute pleasure to. There you go. There we go. Look, round of applause for. I was lucky enough at Klaviyo. We had an event last week with Rory on stage, and this kind man stayed behind for about nearly an hour and a half to talk to a queue of people who just wanted to spend some time, get more insights, but it was deemed as a fantastic presentation. So thank you very much.
Well, you're doing a fantastic job, I think, as well, yourself, in creating a real community around what you do. Because it can be a lonely job.
Yeah.
An extremely lonely job.
That's it. That's it. And I think in terms of like what we're talking about now is like with tech and the world, from software and consumer engagement, it's, and AI is everywhere and in everything we turn and we move. But there's the human component to it. And how do we humanize it? And then we're kind of like this session, and what we're talking about now is like, it's that human algorithm and why relationships are still critical, and how do you get the cut through in that view and approach. And I think that's something that we want to touch on right now. And Rory, I'd love your views on these. So I've got a few questions for you, and I know you've got some fantastic insights on some of these. So if I'm going to ping some questions in your direction and give some great insights for this amazing audience. Gosh, it is hot up here, so.
Yes, it is.
So with Klaviyo, so for those of you who don't know, I'm sure you do, but again, marketing automation platform, serving some great brands globally around the world. And how we do that through various channels, WhatsApp, email, SMS, and so on and so forth. But anyway, by the by, a lot of it's online shopping and online retail. And we did a recent research report. And as part of that, it was showing that many of us customers and consumers, which all of us are today, we're using many channels to buy. So on average, 3/4 of us are using more than 3 channels to consume and then to buy, and then 20% of us, so this portion of the room here, are using more than 5 channels in which to buy and consume. Like, how do brands manage that, knowing that it's quite fragmented and distant with how consumers are buying right now?
Well, I suppose that's one of the reasons you exist, is precisely because you use addressable media. And it's worth noting that you can't fragment addressable media.
Yep.
I always said when I worked in the old days of direct marketing, you can't fragment the letterbox. Everybody only has one.
Sure.
And the same applies, I think, electronically as well. And unfortunately, it's not going to get any easier, because I think AI will create further new channels and further new modes of interaction. Generally, the lesson is, there are exceptions to this, but generally the lesson is, the more channels through which you sell, the more you sell.
Right.
So this isn't something, as I said, with a few exceptions, this isn't something you can, unless your business is all about scarcity, okay? Yep. Unless you have a brand which is entirely predicated on the fact that it's difficult to get hold of. Generally, brands won't have any choice but to become accessible in whatever channel the consumer chooses to use. And by the way, I've seen mistakes around this, and that does not mean. This is, I think, a fundamental question where marketing is right and finance is wrong. Yeah. Finance sometimes has a mentality where what we should try and do is drive everybody through the most efficient channel.
Yep.
Now, my belief is the way brands grow is, this is very Byron Sharpie, by selling to as many people as you can profitably sell to.
Sure.
Okay. And I noticed recently that McDonald's was opening new branches of McDonald's where you could only order on a screen.
Right.
And I can understand exactly the logic by which they've done this, which is you can reduce manpower at the till. I, however, think it's a mistake. I think you will sell less. And it's worth noting that a lot of people in procurement or finance can claim the credit for cost savings, but they never get the blame for lost sales. And that's because costs are quantifiable and opportunity costs aren't. Yep. And there's a massive asymmetry there in the way we judge things. And I notice this more and more, that everybody's trying to drive sales through a particular channel which is high efficiency. At some point, you run counter to the basic Byron Sharp principle, right, that you need to be present and available in buying situations. Yep. And that may be in a very efficient channel. There will always be very efficient customers who come online, order, don't return anything, etc. But that will also include direct mail, because, and I think you have a partnership with programmatic direct mail companies for that very reason. There are certain people for whom you can sell perfectly profitably, but only through that channel.
Yeah. And it's interesting you raise that point around the McDonald's example, because a lot of us will see, like, how do you get to the quickest result? Take away the friction. But
Yeah.
at some point, but you lose that customer experience and that magic that people buy into a brand for. And I think that's when it kind of comes full circle. And like, what are your thoughts on that point?
So just to be clear, I think the screens are great.
Yeah.
I think they think they're great. The speed with which they rolled them out, it generally means you don't have hideous queues anymore. Many people in many situations will prefer to buy from a screen. It also increases the number of men who have a meal with 2 burgers in it, because you don't have the social embarrassment of requesting that from someone who can tell you're a single customer, okay?
Yep.
All of those things are great, but I don't think that means you can walk back on other channels to the extent that some people do. And by the way, there's a philosophical issue here.
Right.
A lot of technology arrives as an option and then ends up being imposed as an obligation. The parking app is that example.
Yep.
It used to be a really handy alternative to pay and display. Now it's the only goddamn way you could pay, which meant that for the last 7 years of his life, my father, in his late 80s, couldn't really park anywhere.
Sure.
So we need to also realize there's also a moral dimension to this as well, in terms of accessibility and availability, particularly to people who are, for example, old, disabled, or whatever it may be.
Yeah, so it's almost like going to that. It's an evolution and a revolution.
Yeah.
Changing different ways in that approach.
It's okay to do more than one thing.
Yeah.
I know that it's anathema to the procurement mind and it's anathema to the finance mind.
Yep.
I made the argument, I think, at our conference. One of the things I love to test is giving consumers a choice of who delivers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay? Because many consumers have a very strong preference for one delivery company over another. It also means if something doesn't turn up, they blame themselves or blame the delivery company. They don't blame the retail brand.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, my hunch is that decision is never taken by marketing. It's taken by someone in procurement who wants to drive everything through one particular distribution company.
Yep.
I fundamentally think that's a mistake. I think it's one of the worst aspects of e-commerce. If I'm paying for delivery, I should fucking well choose who delivers. Anybody else agree? Yeah, thank you. Okay. That's enough people, okay? It's not everybody, but it's enough people to be a sizable proportion of the market.
And so you've mentioned, famously mentioned around marketing being fat-tailed, and that approach moving forwards, and it's kind of like marketers can help to, rather than change the world, but change how people see the world.
Yeah, and by the way, a lot of marketing effects of really big marketing ideas are enduring.
Yep.
Okay. If you create a positioning, as we did for Dove at Ogilvy, that's just one example. If you invent the Uber map, if you come up with a better UX for your website, those things can bring you literally millions of dollars of incremental revenue in perpetuity. And yet, marketing only gets to claim the credit for the effect over the first quarter or the first financial year. Now that's like having a pharmaceutical company where the R&D division is only allowed to claim the value of a drug's first quarter sales.
Yep.
Okay. This is bollocks. Okay. It's simply the wrong way to judge marketing, and the extent to which that happens strikes me as fundamentally problematic. Imagine a world in which you wrote a book, but you were only paid royalties on the sales in the first 6 months.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Now, I think the first print run of Harry Potter, the first Harry Potter book, was 4,000 copies with 500 in hardback.
Wow.
Okay, right? Okay. The point is that, that business works because you claim credit for the subsequent value of things you created in previous financial years.
Yep.
In marketing, you're held responsible for every single unit of cost, but you can only claim credit to a small amount of the value you create. That's not a symmetrical way to judge the value of marketing. It's bollocks.
Yeah. I think it's in terms of getting that balance and that relationship internally from a finance point of view, and having that long-term gain of like, what are we trying to achieve as a brand? Yep. But also, what are you trying to achieve? By the way,
I hope, given Klaviyo's prominence, I hope your clientele are as enthusiastic at testing top of the funnel stuff using addressable media.
Yep.
Now, I grant the fact that it's slower, it's less attributable and it's slower, but you can use mail to create real loyalty, repeat purchase, extraordinary things like that. One of the most underexplored areas in marketing, I think, is actually generosity. if you are disproportionately generous to a customer, so you don't say, you can have this free if you spend £90 or more, you say, you can have a free pair of socks with anything you buy, okay? Generally, that changes the nature of the relationship that the consumer has with the brand. Okay? It's not tested nearly enough, not because it doesn't work, but because it's slow to prove it. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it.
Absolutely. I think it's almost like in software, in some spaces, you get the free trial and something we've probably all done in some way. Great. Get you hooked, get used to it, and then guess what? You're paying for something. But then there's a balance where there's the value exchange of what you can achieve off the back of that too.
So I was talking to a man from Kagi, which is it's actually a subscription search engine, which is, should we say, less in-shitified than other search engines. In other words, if you search for a hotel, it's kagi.com or I think, or org, if you want to try it out. Okay? If you search for a hotel, it actually brings up the hotel, not hotel comparison websites.
Or other things like.
Now, one of the things I persuaded them to do, and the reason I said to do it was that I said, once you get big, the finance people will never let you do this. It has a subscription, a monthly subscription. If you don't use it in any given month, they refund you all your money.
Oh, wow.
So it's automatically an honest subscription. And my argument was, we'll never be able to prove this works. And I'll be honest with that, because we don't have a parallel universe, okay? However, my hunch is that the effect it has on willingness to try the service will outweigh the cost of occasionally refunding the people who are defecting. And if you've got a great business, do you really want to make your money out of customer inertia anyway? You know.
And I think going back to that, like, we're in this world of, like, it's algorithmic, it's AI, but then, like I said, going back to that point, it's human. So every time we take a message to market, we want it to connect with an audience. But sometimes we all like, I put my hand up, I'm guilty of it. You're too busy focused on, well, we need to sell this product. But then you miss the gap of, like, how do I connect better with that person in that audience or in that segment, as an example?
So you have this fundamental asymmetry, as I said, which is, if you do bottom of the funnel stuff and you do cost reduction, you get instant quantifiable results. If you do great marketing, you often get delayed and hard to prove results. Okay. And sometimes impossible to prove, because as I said, there's no, you can't always test. Famously, John Roberts giving away the branded AO bears to anybody they deliver to who has kids, okay? He said, look, I'll never be able to prove this. The reason I do it is that we deliver our own goods. Consequently, all our competitors can't do this, and we can. So we're simply taking advantage of a game theory. We're taking advantage of, an unusual privilege that we have. Can I prove the value of the $1 million check I wrote to buy new bears? No, but I'm going to keep on doing it. Now, he's fortunately the CEO and the founder, so he can do that kind of stuff. I was saying actually at Nudge Stock on Friday in this very same stage that one of the things that's worrying me about business is that a disproportionate number of really good brands come from family-owned companies. And what that suggests to me is there's something about the finance control and structure of public limited companies which makes it hard for them to do good marketing. So if you looked at the 4 out of the 5 winners of the IPA Advertising Effectiveness Awards in this year were Yorkshire Tea, family-owned, McCain, family-owned, let me get the other 2, Specsavers, family-owned, and I can't remember the 4th one, but the 5th one was Guinness, which is, okay, it's Diageo owned, but there's
a family element to it.
It's that element of the business. But I mean, 4 out of 5 IPA Advertising Effectiveness Award winners being family-owned businesses is actually, I think, in an empirical-minded person, that's actually a warning that something about the way in which financial control has permeated the organization to an excessively granular extent is destroying our ability to build brands. There was an online retailer from which my wife buys more than I do, Lux Leopard. It's in Kent. And at Christmas, they just sent us a load of presents. Now, if I'm being desperately cynical, I'm sure these were things they would have put on sale anyway. Okay, but they just sent us a box of presents. Okay. Now, the effect in terms of incremental, the effect in relational value, and therefore both frequency and loyalty and basket size going forward, I'm sure easily paid for itself. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that everybody needs to test this, it's just weird how few people do. Generosity, by the way, is one of the most underexplored tools in marketing.
Yeah.
And the other one is, by the way, encouraging your customers to be generous to their friends is also underexplored.
And it's going back to those brands you mentioned. It's staying true to the values of what that is, and where you kind of you can inherit a brand and then you kind of lose sight of why we were here in the first place. I think that's true, and I love the gifting element. And now it's a matter of great, we're now on stage talking about it, and it amplifies it to an even further crowd. And then how I'm always a crowd makes a crowd. What's everybody looking at and how does that build up? And I think that's a kind of key component. So now we're talking about it and it just leverages that growth moving forwards and for the cost of quite a minimal cost.
And the great thing is with these experiments, if they work, as I said, they work in perpetuity. Now, what's unfair with the treatment of marketers, which is where the whole fat tail thing comes in, is if you have an exceptional result, okay, if you're J.K. Rowling, you get to make an enormous amount of money.
Yep.
All of that money that's being made through good marketing ideas that people had in 2022 is now appearing on the balance sheet as revenue. It's not marketing-driven revenue. In other words, it doesn't buy the marketing department any future indulgence to invest in future futures.
Yep.
That's just the wrong kind of maths, okay? And fundamentally, it is ludicrously dangerous to use what you might call thin-tailed deterministic maths in a probabilistic fat-tailed activity.
So does it relate to then looking at the view of, almost like you've got two speeds going, you've got to play the long game, but also you've got to play the short game, put food on the table at the same time. So you've got to do the two in parallel.
So this is something which various academics believe is a universal law in any dynamic living system.
Yep.
Including, by the way, algorithm design, and it's called the explore-exploit trade-off.
Okay.
My contention is that it's because of our Western mindset we see it as a trade-off, because we automatically see doing two different things as being a compromise.
Right, counts.
But actually the two different things can be complementary. And so it's found in, apologies for everybody who's heard this before, bees have a waggle dance, which is a very efficient way of harvesting known sources of pollen, okay? Right. And the bees do a dance and the other bees obey the dance and they go off in the direction to the distance that they've been instructed and they come back with even more pollen. Great idea. Very, very efficient. That's kind of performance marketing for bees, okay?
Yep.
But they also, a percentage of bees go off at random. And at first they thought this was an inefficiency, and then they realized that, of course, we live in a dynamic system. Pollen gets exhausted, new sources of pollen appear, okay? There are sources of pollen that have always been there, of which you're just unaware because nobody's ever traveled that far in that direction.
Yep.
And they realized that without the exploratory bees, the exploitative bees get trapped in a local maximum and the hive starves to death, or the nest starves to death, okay? Now, interestingly, accountants would look, and procurement people would look very approvingly on the waggle dance bees,
of course, yeah,
because they are very easy to measure. It's a simple cost, it's a simple double entry bookkeeping system of energy expended, energy recovered, and it's an efficiency optimization problem, okay? But the other part of the bees activity is a discovery optimization problem, where what you're trying to do is come back not with pollen, but one journey in 150, you come back with something much more valuable than that, which is information about a new source of pollen. Okay. Now, marketing, I think, sits heavily in the vector of exploration. It should be treated as a branch of R&D, and it should be financed accordingly. But instead, and I blame the tech world, not you specifically, just be clear, but I blame Meta and Google to an extent, and the consulting firms who are deeply comfortable with efficiency optimization, which they also find deeply lucrative, for distorting marketing so that it's more about gaining a 3% efficiency improvement at the bottom of the funnel than it is about discovering something that will actually bring in literally billions, in some cases, the pumpkin spice latte, okay? $1 billion discovery.
Yep.
Okay? Share a Coke with, $1 billion marketing idea, okay? Now, that's really the point of what you do. David Ogilvy said that in his whole life he'd only had 5 big ideas. Now, what that meant was presumably in the 35 years he worked at Ogilvy, the finance department should be massively pissed off with him for 30 of those years. But the simple fact is it doesn't work like that, okay? Yep. There is no particular proportionality between effort expended and value created. And so trying to make it look like a kind of iron ore mining when really what you're doing is treasure hunting is actually a perversion of what marketing should be.
100%.
And by the way, I wasn't paid to say this, I'm not blowing smoke up your ass, but I think yours is a great experimental platform.
100%.
Because it's a two-way, Jeff Bezos, it's a two-way door, right? Try it, don't argue it to death. Don't say, how can we do a cost-benefit analysis? Don't say, we need evidence of this, because there's no evidence for doing anything new, and that's because it's fucking new, right? Okay? Nobody's done it before, so by definition, there is no data to support doing it, although there might be analogies which support doing it, or there might be parallel companies that support doing it. Instead, just go, it's probably cheaper to try this than it is to argue about it.
To not.
Because it's reversible. Now, Jeff Bezos made this wonderful distinction between decisions which were a two-way door and decisions which were a one-way door. And he said most people treat all decisions as if they're a one-way door. Now, he said, if you're building a 20 million square foot warehouse outside Nashville, right, you can't really reverse on that once you've built the bastard, right? That's a big commitment, and you can argue it to death. By contrast, Amazon Prime, which by the way everybody but Jeff hated when he first had the idea, Amazon Prime, not the movie part, but the free delivery, that's a two-way door. Test it. If your customers don't like it, or you have a huge number of customers who buy so many small items that you lose money, stop doing it, okay? And yet Jeff's point is, Jeff's very interesting in that, of course he got married, didn't he, over the weekend?
He did, yeah.
But it's decision science, I suppose, yeah. Anyway, well, I'll park that one, okay. But the interesting thing there is that, funnily enough, Amazon Web Services, there wasn't a very good case made, and Jeff just said, I don't understand why we're arguing about this, it's a two-way door. We've got to do all this stuff anyway. If we can sell it on to other people at a profit, whoop-de-doo. If we can't, we'll stop doing it. And actually, we've created this kind of finance-driven paranoia around failure. But there's a huge difference between a small failure in pursuit of a massive gain.
Correct.
Okay, and a small gain in avoidance of, sometimes small gains, the alternative to a small gain was a massive gain you were too afraid to try.
I think that's the thing. Look, we could go on for hours and hours and hours. Always a pleasure.
But no, I think your platform is welcome, because if more people try more things inexpensively and reversibly...
Not paid to say this.
I wasn't paid to say this. No.
Not at all.
No, but bear in mind, I grew up in direct marketing, so I can only like it.
It's another challenge.
Because the joy of direct marketing was Drayton Bird, who he was and is indeed the doyen of direct marketing, very, very hard-headed businessman. But he said something which surprised me. He said, you don't do direct marketing to make money, you do it to learn.
Music
Oh, sorry, we've got to get into the music. Sorry. Okay, I wasn't looking in your direction.
So, look, ladies and
gentlemen, this to learn.
So look, a big round of applause, please, for Rory.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Done. Always a pleasure. Done.